My name's Greg Nesteroff. I'm a local news reporter professionally. I've worked in radio and newspapers in the West Kootenay since 1998, off and on. The other thing that I'm known for is being a local historian. So I'm a history buff. I've just written a book about the guy who founded Sandon. I co-wrote a photo history book about the Kootenays, and I've contributed chapters to various other books as well. I run a blog called The Kootenay Reader, which is shorter pieces about Kootenay history. I have another blog about the Patrick family of hockey fame, who they lived around here for a while, so that's my connection to that. There's some intersection between my professional career as a journalist and my history stuff. Whenever I can put something on the news that's related to local history, I try to. Being a news reporter is what pays the bills, and then history is more of a hobby. My mom's side of the family are community Doukhobors from Udashenya. My dad's side of the family were independents from Blaine Lake who came out in the 40s. My grandpa was from Slocan Park. My parents got married in the 70s. I was born in 1977. I was raised to be definitely conscious of my Doukhobor background. We did go to Sunday school for about a year in Shore Acres. And then we gave it up because I don't think any of us were really enjoying it all that much. Big reason, of course, it was all in Russian. As kids, we didn't know what was going on. We didn't understand what was being said. Nobody really explained it to us. And we were also standing for an hour or whatever. So I think my parents eventually relented. My grandparents were, on my mother's side, were USCC members, but I don't think they were, like, they wouldn't go to Malenya every week. You know, they were paying USCC members and they took it seriously, but they weren't especially religious. But the culture I was certainly exposed to throughout my childhood, you know, the food and the ceremonies and the singing. And I found that really interesting historically and culturally. So even though I didn't really care to go to Sunday school to sort of do the rituals, I did find it really interesting. And so as a teenager, or maybe even younger, maybe like, you know, 10 or 12 years old, I would go to the library and start taking books out about Doukhobor history and trying to learn more about it. I don't think that was necessarily my entry point into local history, but it was definitely one aspect of local history that I was always interested in, this, you know, my own background, my family background. The extent to which Doukhobor philosophy influences my thinking. So maybe not consciously, but it does. I don't drink, I don't smoke, would never own a weapon, abhor violence. Now, I do eat meat. I'm not a religious person, so it's not 100%, but I think that those ideas, those philosophies definitely have an influence on me, or an ongoing influence on me, even if I don't really think about it. In some ways, I think my wife's more of a Doukhobor than I am. She's into the food, she's into the culture, the singing, and not to say that I'm not. I mean, if somebody puts a bowl of borscht in front of me, I will eat it, sure, but it's not my favorite. Whereas, you know, she's out buying borscht and procuring it, and she is interested in local history. Now, maybe not to the extent that I am, but yeah, it is something that interests her. We're both on the Slocan Valley Historical Society board. She's the vice president and I'm the secretary. And she has extensive family history around here too. She's part of the Wingy family from Slocan City. That's, you know, a well-known name in the valley. So I've been on the Silvery Slocan Historical Society, the Arrow Lakes Historical Society, on the boards of all of those, and then been a member of all the other ones. So museums had a big effect on me, but again, it was funny how, as a kid, I figured, well, I guess all there is to find out has already been found out. There's nothing for me to do. And actually, yeah, you can. There's lots that you can do. Every person who's ever lived around here, you could write a story about. Every building that's ever built, you could write a story about it. Just it's what matters to you, though, right? So the stuff that I write about are the things that matter to me. There's various reasons why they might matter to me. Maybe I have a personal connection to me. Maybe there's a mystery associated with them that I'm intrigued and I want to solve. Maybe it has to do with an artifact that I have and I want to know what the story is. Or have a really good picture of something, or there's something in the picture that confuses me and I want to learn more about it. So most of all, the stuff that I do, it's because it means something to me, and it's the area that means something to me. Mainly, it's what happened here is what really interests me. You know, this museum, the Doukhobor Discovery Center, my grandfather took me here for the first time. I think I was 15 or 16. So my parents were not that interested in history. I got them interested in history. I was the one thereafter dragging them around to museums. They weren't the ones taking me, but actually he took me here. He took me took me and my brother to the Station Museum and to the Kootenay Gallery, and we'd never been to any of them before. Well, when I was 7 or 8 years old, my parents told me that we were going to go see a ghost town, and I didn't know what that meant. And I certainly didn't expect what we saw when we got there, because it was, you know, it was like piles of lumber and a few surviving buildings, but I didn't quite know what to make of it. But they did have a museum at the time. It was in the former police station, which is next to the old City Hall, which is now the Prospector's Pick gift shop. And it made a really big impression on me. Very modest museum, but I think it was the first museum that I had ever been to, of any kind. Probably one of the things that whetted my appetite for local history was that visit to Sandon as a kid. I actually, from a young age, thought that I wanted to do something involving local history. I've just written a book, a biography of John Morgan Harris, who's the guy who founded Sandon. Well, I was interested in the folklore surrounding Sandon generally. And this guy who started the town seemed to have like a whole mythology built right around him. His name kept coming up again and again and again. There were a number of things that were said about him that I wasn't sure whether they were true or not. And some of them turned out to be absolutely false, or they were exaggeration. Other things that I thought would be false turned out to be true. So that was really interesting. So somewhere along the way, I thought, you know, this could be an interesting book. And I ended up going to the places where where he was born in Virginia, the town in Idaho where he started to make a name for himself, and to start to learn about him and his past and his secrets, because he had a lot of secrets, dark secrets. So this book is kind of about exposing some of those secrets. Somebody asked me, you know, what do you think he would think of your book? And I think at first blush he'd go, oh wow, somebody's written a book about me, you know, how flattering. And then he'd start to read it and go, oh, you know, and realize that I'm telling his dark secrets. And so I don't think he'd be too impressed that. Well, I mean, the same as if somebody 100 years from now wrote a book about you or me, and maybe it was warts and all, and maybe not the way that we would have written it ourselves. So the second printing will arrive this week, as a matter of fact. So the first printing is all spoken for. That doesn't mean that it's sold out, but it's either in stores, or I've sold it, or gotten rid of copies. It's gratifying that it's getting that response, because it did take me a really, really long time to do it. So it's a big relief to finally be done with it. Nathan Wilkinson, who's one of my best friends, was the co-editor, the copy editor, and the designer on the book that I recently wrote. And so we went to school together from elementary school onward and high school. I really admire the stuff that Jonathan Kalmakoff does, because he digs into the details. Well, this is a good topic, because those books that I was taking out about Doukhobor history when I was a kid, there's some really good ones, but they tend to be very broad. They give you a very broad overview. The stuff that Jonathan does is drilling down to the details, not just sort of settling for the broad picture, but trying to find out all of the little details that are within. And to me, that's where the really interesting stuff is to be found. You can keep on drilling down and drilling down and drilling down to each sort of subsection, and you start to find things that nobody knew, or, you know, stories that haven't been told before. That's the thing that gets me excited. When I can find a story, and realize, hey, nobody's dug into this before. Great, this is fertile territory for me to dig into this story. That's what I get excited about. Because, I mean, some stories have been told extensively in various histories, although even so, sometimes stories that have been told a lot, there's room to start poking around at details that haven't been told. I think in the early 2000s, I came across a sign by Verrigan's tomb, now Verrigan Memorial Park, that pointed the direction to a historic site. Actually, I can't remember. It may have been that the person who worked there told me about it, or maybe I came across the sign. Anyway, I followed the sign, and you go down these a set of stairs that were made out of railway ties. You descend down the hillside, and you kind of come around a corner, and there's this stone bench and a stone table and a little sign that says that this was Peter Lordley Verrigan's prayer site or meditation site, and that it had been restored by the brilliant choir in 1983. And I thought, well, this is pretty cool. I've never heard of this before. And so I took a picture of it. And maybe 10 years later, 12 years later, I went back to try to find it. And I found the stairs. I think the sign was still there, but it had been spray painted over. Found the stairs, went down the stairs, couldn't find the prayer site anymore. I thought, what is going on here? How come I can't? And I tried, I think, twice more in the ensuing years. And I asked people, an attendant that summer working at the park if they knew about it, and she'd never even heard of it. So now I'm starting to question myself. Did I dream this? And as it turned out, around that time, I had these sort of archaic tape drive discs that I had stored a lot of photos on, and I finally got them transferred to CDs. And lo and behold, there was the photo that I took when I went that day. So at least, okay, now I know it's real. I wasn't making it up. Finally, then one day, my wife said, well, let's both go look for it. I was like, okay, but I looked everywhere. I don't think we're going to find it. But she's more optimistic than I am. And she says a little prayer to Lordley to say, show us the way. And so we go bushwhacking again. By this time, it's quite overgrown. And even the sort of the place where the stairs are hard to find. The trailhead is hard to find. But we find the trailhead and we start walking down and we start again bushwhacking through the area, and no luck. She goes one way, I go the other way, and I'm looking up at the hillside and going, I don't know where this thing is. And I turn around and she's gone. I'm like, where are you? And she says, follow my voice. Okay. And so I cut through kind of some bushes that are an overgrown area, and I break through to where she is, and then it opens up again, and I go, oh, okay. So we start walking down the hillside, and the thing I'd forgotten is there's like a rill that runs through that area. So the grass is really wet, and their feet are getting soaked, and I'm trying to see if there's some way to get around it, but there's no way around it. So we're like, okay, I guess we're gonna get soaked. I did find it, the site of the prayer site. The funny thing is that it overlooks somebody's backyard. So it's maybe like, if you were in that person's backyard, you could walk up in less than 30 seconds to the site rather than having to bushwhack your way down the hillside. But we found it, and it was exactly as I remembered it. Nothing really had changed. It wasn't, that particular site was still cleared. And so I ended up writing a blog post about it. And one of the things that resulted was the discovery of some video of the brilliant choir performing there in 1983. And so I was able to add that video to the blog post as well. When something happens, and it could be an event, and there were lots of people at the event, you think, well, I don't need to make a record of this because we were all here. We all remember it. We all, lots of people were here. But then time goes on, and eventually there's only a small number of people who remember that event. And then they're gone too. So everybody's memory is valuable. But you don't necessarily think about it. You think, well, I was there with 1,000 other people, so what difference does it make my memory of it? But who knows? Maybe your memory will be the only one that survives of that event. That's I find kind of remarkable to think about. I mean, how many people went to Peter Verrigan's funeral? Lots. And how many first-hand accounts do we have of the funeral? Not a lot. What was written in the newspapers, and that's about it. There would have been lots of people who would have had memories of that, but how many of them either wrote it down themselves or told their grandchildren? Then it becomes harder to extract. There might be people who can remember their grandparents saying, oh yeah, I remember the funeral and what I was doing that day and what went down, but it becomes, at a remove to try to get at that information. I'm really grateful when people do write things down. So grateful for whatever memoirs or for whatever histories that we do have. Precious, precious things. I was thinking about this the other day. One of the things that sometimes people don't think of themselves as historians, or they don't think of themselves as writers, and then therefore maybe they don't do it. but it's just as valuable. Doesn't matter. Like maybe it's not perfect, or maybe you think it's too, I don't know, ordinary, but those stories are just as important to capture. You know, the idea that history is to be told by the great men or the famous people, and I'm always less interested in that and more interested in what was going on amongst the common folk, or what sort of quotidian things were going on every day. Well, right now, because I'm working full-time, I don't have as much time to devote to my historical projects as I like, but I have long lists of things that I do want to do, lots of blog posts and things that I'd like to do. I've got several other book projects, but none of them will be as massive as the one that I just finished. I mean, I hope. Famous last words, maybe, but one of the ones that I had been working on that I set aside was a book on place names of the West Kootenay boundary. So I wrote a series in the local newspapers for many years about that. Now I'd like to sort of collect and expand and add to that. And lots of other book projects too. One is about a Slocan Lake treasure story. One's about a Grand Forks police officer who died under mysterious circumstances in 1920. Those are a few of them. I like to do a booklet about Black pioneers of the West Kootenay. That was a subject that nobody had written about before until I cottoned onto it. Now actually there's been more interest in that subject as well, so that would interest me. It's exciting when there's a story that hasn't been told. It's also exciting when I can connect a story with a family. Sometimes, you know, there's a story about somebody's grandparents or something, and you ask them, did you know about this? Do you have any information? And the connections that you make that way can be really rewarding too. Actually, the Black Canadians one was really neat. What happened was I was reading a copy of the Nelson High School yearbook from 1956. This is when the old Nelson High School was closing and the new high school was being built. And there was a story in there from a woman named Hester Wagener. And she wrote a memoir of being the only black student in Nelson in like 1910. I thought, that's amazing. And so I managed to track down her granddaughter who lives in Los Angeles. And after one conversation on the phone, the granddaughter, Mabel Collins is her name, bundled all these pictures into a box and sent them to me. I couldn't believe that she would, trust me like that just after one phone call. Photos of her mother and her grandfather and her extended relations when they lived in Nelson, and also Caslow as well. And so actually, we eventually got to go visit her in Los Angeles and stay with her for a few days. So she was really touched, I think, again, that I was interested in her family history, and was able to give her stuff that she had never seen before, and she was able to give me stuff that I'd certainly never seen before, never would have otherwise seen. In the moment, everybody knows a detail, or something is not appreciated as being significant that another generation will want to know about it. So now we've got, sort of bits and pieces that we try to put together, but you're like, if only I could just ask the person, because they would have known, but they didn't, it just wasn't thought of at the time as something that was worth writing down, or everybody knows it, so why do I have to record this thing? We do things, or we think about things that generations hence will wonder about, and we'll be like, well, it just didn't occur to me that you'd be interested. Focus on whatever interests you. To me, it doesn't have to be big picture stuff. It can be small picture stuff. It can be, you could write a history of your house. You could write a history of a relative of yours. You could write a history of anything, any object you could pick up and try to see what you can find out about that. Find something that means something to you, and then go learn about that.